Sara Martina wiped the sweat from her palms as she stood at the entrance of the military training facility. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete courtyard, and the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the air. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that it was here, her heart pounded with nervous excitement. The young woman clutched her registration papers tightly. At 24, Sara worked as a cashier at a small grocery store in her hometown, but shooting had always been her passion. Every weekend, she would visit her grandfather's old farm where he had taught her to shoot tin cans off fence posts with his rusty rifle. Those precious hours spent learning patience, breathing control, and precision had shaped her into something special, though she didn't realize it yet. Colonel Harrison emerged from the main building, his weathered face stern and his uniform perfectly pressed. Behind him followed a group of experienced marksmen, some active military personnel, others seasoned competitors who had traveled from across the state to participate in this prestigious shooting contest. Sara felt small among these intimidating figures, most of whom carried expensive custom rifles and wore professional shooting gear. "Welcome to the annual Precision Shooting Championship," Colonel Harrison announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "This competition will test not only your accuracy, but your mental strength, discipline, and ability to perform under pressure. Over the next 3 days, you will face challenges that will push you to your limits." Sara looked around at her fellow competitors. There was Marcus, a former Marine whose reputation preceded him; Jennifer, a police officer known for her exceptional marksmanship scores; David, whose family owned a shooting range and who had been competing since he was 12 years old. Each person seemed more qualified than Sara, making her question whether she belonged there at all. The colonel continued explaining the rules. The competition would consist of multiple rounds, each more challenging than the last. Participants would be eliminated based on their performance, with only the top shooters advancing to the final round. The winner would receive not only a substantial cash prize, but also recognition as one of the finest marksmen in the region. As they moved toward the shooting range, Sara noticed how the other competitors moved with confidence, discussing advanced techniques and comparing their expensive equipment. She carried only her grandfather's modified hunting rifle, which she had carefully maintained and upgraded with her limited savings. The weapon might not have looked impressive, but Sara knew every inch of it, every slight adjustment needed for different conditions. The first challenge was announced: precision shooting at various distances, starting at 100 yards and extending to 400 yards. Each shooter would have 5 attempts at each distance, with scoring based on proximity to the bullseye. Sara watched nervously as the first few competitors took their turns, most achieving impressive scores that seemed impossible for her to match. When her name was called, Sara approached the shooting line with trembling hands. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her, judging her simple equipment and modest appearance. Taking her position, she tried to remember everything her grandfather had taught her about breathing, stance, and focus. The weight of the rifle felt familiar and comforting in her hands. Her first shot at 100 yards was slightly off-center, earning a respectable but not outstanding score. Disappointment flashed across her face, but she forced herself to remain calm. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Don't let one bad shot ruin the next 4 good ones, Sara girl." The second shot was better, closer to the center. The third was even more precise. By her 4th shot, Sara had found her rhythm, and the bullseye seemed to grow larger in her scope. Her final shot at 100 yards hit dead center, earning murmurs of approval from the watching crowd. As the distances increased, something remarkable began to happen. While other competitors struggled with the longer ranges, Sara seemed to improve. Her years of practice on her grandfather's farm, where she had learned to account for wind, elevation changes, and varying light conditions, served her well. Each shot was carefully calculated, precisely executed. At 200 yards, she achieved 4 bullseyes out of 5 shots. At 300 yards, her performance was flawless. When the 400-yard challenge arrived, even the most experienced competitors were showing signs of strain. The distance required not just skill, but an almost supernatural ability to read conditions and make minute adjustments. Sara approached the 400-yard line with quiet confidence. The nervous girl from that morning had been replaced by a focused marksman who understood her capabilities. She studied the wind flags, felt the air movement against her skin, and adjusted her scope accordingly. Her first shot at the extreme distance was a perfect bullseye. Colonel Harrison, who had been observing quietly from the side, stepped forward to get a better look through his binoculars. The second shot was another bullseye. The third, fourth, and fifth shots followed suit. 5 perfect shots at 400 yards, a feat that even seasoned professionals rarely achieved. The shooting range fell silent except for the distant sound of wind through the trees. Other competitors stared in disbelief at the young woman with the old rifle who had just delivered a performance that belonged in the record books. Sara herself seemed surprised by what she had accomplished, looking down at her rifle as if seeing it for the first time. Marcus, the former Marine, was the first to speak. "That was incredible shooting," he said, extending his hand to Sara. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that 400-yard performance." Jennifer, the police officer, nodded in agreement. "Where did you train? That level of precision doesn't just happen by accident." Sara felt her cheeks redden as she explained about her grandfather's farm and their weekend practice sessions. The explanation seemed almost too simple for the extraordinary skill she had just demonstrated, but it was the truth. Years of patient practice, combined with natural talent and an inherited understanding of marksmanship, had created something special. Colonel Harrison approached with a slight smile on his typically stern face. "Young lady, in 30 years of running shooting competitions, I have rarely witnessed such natural ability combined with such obvious dedication to the craft. Your performance today was truly exceptional." As the first day of competition concluded, Sara found herself in second place overall, just a few points behind David, whose lifetime of competitive experience had given him a slight edge in the earlier shorter distance rounds. However, her dominant performance at longer ranges had served notice to everyone present that she was a serious contender for the championship. That evening, as other competitors gathered in the lodge to discuss the day's events and share stories of their shooting experiences, Sara sat quietly on the porch, cleaning her rifle and reflecting on the extraordinary day. She thought about her grandfather, who had passed away 2 years earlier, and how proud he would have been to see her performance. The old man had always insisted she had a special gift, but she had never truly believed him until today. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sara knew the competition would only intensify as the field was narrowed down to the most skilled participants. But for the first time since arriving at the facility, she felt like she truly belonged among these accomplished marksmen, and she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had a real chance to win the entire competition. Dawn broke gray and overcast as Sara prepared for the second day of competition. The weather had changed overnight, bringing with it gusty winds and intermittent drizzle that would make shooting conditions significantly more challenging. She had barely slept, her mind replaying every shot from the previous day while simultaneously worrying about what lay ahead. In the dining hall, conversations among competitors were more subdued than they had been the evening before. Yesterday's results had reshuffled everyone's expectations, and Sara could feel curious glances directed her way as she quietly ate her breakfast. The initial dismissive attitudes some had shown toward the young woman with the old rifle had been replaced by respectful wariness. Colonel Harrison entered the dining hall precisely at 7 o'clock, carrying a clipboard and wearing his customary serious expression. Good morning, shooters. Today's challenges will test your ability to adapt and perform under adverse conditions. We'll be conducting moving target exercises, followed by rapid-fire precision shooting, and concluding with a stress test that will push your mental resilience to its limits. Sara felt her stomach tighten. Moving targets and rapid-fire shooting were areas where she had limited experience. Her grandfather's farm had provided excellent training for long-range precision work, but the dynamic challenges planned for today would require skills she had never fully developed. The first event was announced: clay pigeon shooting with rifles instead of shotguns. Participants would need to track and hit rapidly moving targets at varying distances and trajectories. It was an unusual challenge that would test reflexes, tracking ability, and the capacity to make split-second calculations. Marcus, the former Marine, excelled in this event, his military training having prepared him for exactly this type of dynamic shooting. His shots were quick, confident, and devastatingly accurate. David also performed well, drawing on years of competitive shooting experience that included similar challenges. Sara, however, struggled initially, missing her first two targets as she attempted to adjust to the unfamiliar demands of tracking moving objects. Standing at the line, Sara forced herself to slow down and think. Her grandfather had taught her about leading targets when hunting birds, but this was different. Faster, more unpredictable, requiring intuitive reactions rather than careful calculation. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to access some deeper understanding of timing and movement. When the next clay pigeon was launched, something clicked. Instead of trying to calculate the target's path, Sara simply let her instincts guide the rifle. The shot connected, shattering the clay disc in a satisfying explosion of orange fragments. The next target fell as well, and suddenly Sara found herself in a rhythm, her natural hand-eye coordination adapting to the new challenge. By the end of the moving target round, Sara had recovered from her slow start to finish in third place, behind Marcus and David, but ahead of several more experienced competitors. More importantly, she had discovered something about her own abilities, an adaptability that went beyond her technical training. The rapid-fire precision event proved even more challenging. Competitors were required to engage multiple targets in sequence, with strict time limits that demanded both speed and accuracy. Points were awarded for hits, but deducted for misses, creating a delicate balance between rushing and maintaining precision. Sara watched as other competitors blazed through the course, their movements fluid and practiced. When her turn arrived, she decided to sacrifice some speed for accuracy, reasoning that clean hits were more valuable than hasty misses. Her methodical approach initially put her behind the pace, but as the course progressed, her consistency began to pay dividends. While other shooters were accumulating penalty points for missed shots, Sara's patient, measured approach resulted in a higher overall score despite her slower time. Her performance demonstrated a mature understanding of competition strategy that impressed the observing officials and fellow competitors alike. But it was the final event of the day that truly tested everyone's limits. The stress test was designed to simulate high-pressure scenarios that would reveal each shooter's mental toughness. Competitors were required to perform precision shooting while dealing with deliberate distractions, loud noises, time pressure, physical discomfort, and psychological pressure from observers. As Sara prepared for the stress test, Colonel Harrison approached her individually. "Miss Martina," he said quietly, "your performance yesterday and your adaptability today have been remarkable. This final challenge will determine who among you has the mental fortitude to excel when everything is working against them." The stress test began with competitors required to hold a precision shooting position for an extended period while facing a target that would only be exposed for brief, random intervals. Physical strain combined with mental pressure as loud music, sudden noises, and bright flashing lights created a deliberately overwhelming environment. Sara struggled initially with the chaotic conditions. her shots scattered and inconsistent. But gradually, she began to employ a mental technique her grandfather had taught her during thunderstorms, finding a calm center within herself that remained untouched by external chaos. She focused on her breathing, on the familiar weight of her rifle, on the simple mechanics of sight alignment and trigger control. Other competitors around her were becoming visibly frustrated, their performance deteriorating as stress accumulated. David, who had been leading the overall competition, began to show cracks in his composure, his shots becoming increasingly erratic. Marcus maintained better discipline, but even his military training showed signs of strain under the relentless pressure. Sara, however, seemed to grow calmer as the test progressed. Each shot became more deliberate, more precise. The chaos around her faded into background noise as she entered a state of focused concentration that surprised even herself. By the final stage of the stress test, she was shooting with the same precision she had demonstrated during the quiet, controlled conditions of the previous day. When the stress test concluded, exhausted competitors gathered around the results board with nervous anticipation. The complex scoring system took into account not just accuracy, but consistency under pressure, adaptability to changing conditions, and overall performance across all three events of the day. The results were shocking. Sara had finished the day in first place, her strong performance in the stress test having propelled her past both David and Marcus in the overall standings. Her ability to maintain precision under pressure had proven to be her greatest strength, setting her apart from competitors with more traditional training backgrounds. Colonel Harrison called for attention as he prepared to announce the finalists who would compete in the following day's championship round. Based on 2 days of exceptional shooting under increasingly challenging conditions, the following 5 competitors will advance to tomorrow's final competition. The names were called in reverse order of ranking. Jennifer, the police officer, had secured 5th place through consistent, solid performance. A veteran competitor named Robert claimed 4th place. Marcus took 3rd, his military precision serving him well despite struggles with the stress test. David, despite his difficult second day, held on to 2nd place based on his overall consistency. And in 1st place, advancing to tomorrow's championship as our top-ranked shooter, Colonel Harrison announced, his voice carrying a note of admiration, Miss Sara Martina. The announcement created a buzz of conversation among the gathered crowd. Sara herself seemed stunned by the announcement, looking around as if expecting to discover they were talking about someone else. The journey from nervous grocery store cashier to leading competitor in a prestigious shooting competition seemed almost impossible to believe. That evening, as Sara cleaned her rifle and prepared for the final day of competition, she reflected on how much she had learned about herself over the past 2 days. The shy, uncertain woman who had arrived at the facility had discovered reserves of skill, adaptability, and mental strength she never knew existed. Marcus approached her as she worked on her rifle maintenance. "I wanted to congratulate you on your performance," he said sincerely. "I've competed against some of the best shooters in the country, and what you're doing here is genuinely extraordinary. Whatever happens tomorrow, you should be proud of what you've accomplished." Sara thanked him, feeling a warm sense of belonging among these skilled competitors who had welcomed her despite her unconventional background. Tomorrow would bring the ultimate test, but she no longer felt like an outsider hoping to prove herself. She had already proven herself. Now she was simply a marksman preparing to compete for a championship she had earned the right to pursue. The final morning dawned clear and crisp, with perfect conditions that seemed designed for a championship showdown. Sara woke before her alarm, her body naturally preparing for what would be the most important day of her shooting career. The facility buzzed with anticipation as word had spread about the unlikely finalist who had emerged from nowhere to challenge the established competitors. Local news crews had arrived overnight, drawn by the story of a grocery store cashier who had outshot seasoned professionals with her grandfather's old rifle. Sara tried to ignore the cameras and reporters, focusing instead on her preparation routine. She methodically cleaned her rifle, checked her ammunition, and ran through the mental exercises her grandfather had taught her for maintaining calm under pressure. Colonel Harrison gathered the 5 finalists in his office for a private briefing about the championship round. The format would be unique, a combination of all the skills tested over the previous 2 days, culminating in a sudden death elimination round where a single missed shot could end a competitor's hopes. This final challenge has been designed to crown a true champion, the colonel explained. Someone who can perform under ultimate pressure, adapt to changing conditions, and maintain precision when everything is on the line. The winner will not just be the best shooter present, but someone who embodies the complete spirit of marksmanship. The championship began with a warm-up round at standard distances, allowing each finalist to settle into their rhythm. Sara felt surprisingly calm as she took her position, the nervous energy of the previous days having evolved into focused determination. Her shots were clean and precise, placing her in the middle of the pack, exactly where she wanted to be as the real competition began. The first formal round involved precision shooting at extreme distances, extending beyond even the 400-yard challenges of the opening day. At 600 yards, atmospheric conditions, minute variations in ammunition, and the slightest tremor in shooting form would be magnified into significant differences in accuracy. David, drawing on his lifetime of competitive experience, shot first and delivered a performance that seemed almost flawless. His shots grouped tightly around the bullseye, setting a standard that would be difficult to match. Marcus followed with his own excellent performance, military training evident in his methodical approach and consistent execution. When Sara's turn arrived, she felt the weight of expectations from the gathered crowd. Television cameras recorded her every movement as she settled into her shooting position. She could hear whispered conversations speculating about whether the previous day's performances had been fluky or representative of her true ability. Closing her eyes briefly, Sara transported herself mentally back to her grandfather's farm. She could almost smell the hay fields and hear his patient voice guiding her through her first long-range shots years earlier. When she opened her eyes, the target seemed to jump into sharp focus, and everything else faded away. Her first shot at 600 yards was a bullseye. The second shot grouped within millimeters of the first. By her 5th and final shot, Sara had achieved something remarkable. A perfect score at extreme distance, with all shots clustering in a group smaller than a silver dollar. The crowd erupted in amazed applause, and even her fellow competitors stood to acknowledge the extraordinary shooting. But the championship was far from over. The next phase introduced moving targets at various distances, requiring split-second timing and intuitive shooting skills. This was where Sara's relative inexperience with dynamic challenges might prove costly against more seasoned competitors. Jennifer, the police officer, excelled in this round, her law enforcement training having prepared her for quick reaction scenarios. Her shots were fast, accurate, and confident. Robert, the veteran competitor, also performed well. Decades of varied shooting challenges evident in his smooth technique. Sara struggled initially, missing her first target as she overcorrected for movement speed. The miss drew sympathetic groans from spectators who had been pulling for the underdog story. But Sara had learned over the past 3 days to trust her instincts and adapt quickly to new challenges. Her subsequent shots found their marks with increasing consistency. She began to anticipate target movements rather than simply reacting to them, developing an almost supernatural sense of timing. By the end of the moving target round, she had recovered to maintain her position among the top performers. The competition then moved to its most intense phase. Rapid-fire shooting under extreme time pressure. Competitors had to engage multiple targets in sequence within strict time limits while maintaining precision standards. Any shot outside the scoring rings would result in significant point penalties. Marcus dominated this round, his military background providing perfect preparation for the quick, accurate shooting required. His movements were fluid and economical, each shot fired with mechanical precision. David also performed well, though the pressure was beginning to show in slightly less consistent groupings. Sara approached the rapid-fire challenge with her characteristic methodical mindset. Rather than rushing to match the pace of more experienced competitors, she maintained her natural rhythm while pushing herself to move more quickly than felt comfortable. The strategy worked, resulting in clean hits throughout the sequence despite a slightly slower overall time. As the formal rounds concluded, the 5 finalists found themselves separated by mere points. The championship would be decided by the sudden death elimination round that Colonel Harrison had promised, a format that would test not just shooting skills, but mental toughness when everything was on the line. The elimination format was brutally simple. Each competitor would take a single shot at a challenging target. The lowest score would be eliminated, and the process would repeat until only one shooter remained. Miss the target entirely, and elimination was immediate regardless of others' performances. Robert, the veteran competitor, was eliminated first when a slight wind shift caught his shot at an unfortunate moment. Jennifer followed in the next round, victim of a mechanical malfunction with her rifle that resulted in a flyer shot. The field was down to 3, Sara, Marcus, and David. The pressure was immense as the remaining competitors prepared for what could be their final shots. Television cameras captured every moment, and the gathered crowd fell silent with anticipation. Colonel Harrison announced the target distance, 450 yards with scoring rings that left minimal margin for error. David shot first, his lifetime of competitive experience evident in his calm preparation and smooth execution. His shot was excellent, striking well within the scoring area and setting a high standard. Marcus followed with his own precise shot, placing it slightly closer to center than David's effort. Sara was last to shoot, knowing that anything less than perfection would likely end her championship hopes. As she settled into position, she became aware of the surreal nature of the moment. A small-town grocery store clerk competing for a championship against seasoned professionals, using her grandfather's old rifle to challenge the sport's elite. The weight of her rifle felt familiar and comforting as she acquired the target in her scope. Wind conditions were stable, lighting was perfect, and her breathing fell into the natural rhythm her grandfather had taught her years earlier. When the shot broke, Sara knew immediately that it was good, perhaps the best shot of her life. The target was retrieved and examined by officials while the crowd waited in tense silence. When Colonel Harrison stepped forward with the results, his expression was unreadable. David's shot scored 9.8 points. Marcus achieved 9.9 points. He paused dramatically before continuing. Sara's shot scored a perfect 10.0, dead center bullseye. The elimination continued with David departing gracefully after congratulating both remaining competitors on their exceptional performance. The championship now came down to Sara and Marcus, 2 shooters from completely different backgrounds united by their pursuit of marksmanship excellence. The final 2 shots would be taken at an unprecedented distance of 500 yards, pushing the limits of their equipment and skills. Marcus, with decades of military and competitive experience, shot first and delivered a nearly perfect performance that earned appreciative nods from observing officials. Sara knew that anything less than perfection would mean second place. As she prepared for the most important shot of her life, she thought about her grandfather and the countless hours they had spent together on his farm. She thought about the journey that had brought her from that simple beginning to this moment of ultimate challenge. The shot was perfect. Not just good, not just accurate, but absolutely perfect. A mathematical center hit that represented the pinnacle of marksmanship achievement. The measuring officials confirmed what everyone could see. Sara had achieved something that bordered on the impossible. Colonel Harrison stepped forward to make the championship announcement, his voice carrying obvious admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to declare Sara Martina the champion of this year's precision shooting competition. Her performance over these 3 days has been nothing short of extraordinary, representing the finest traditions of marksmanship skill, mental toughness, and sporting excellence." The crowd erupted in celebration as Sara stood in stunned disbelief. The grocery store cashier with her grandfather's old rifle had defeated seasoned professionals to claim the championship. Marcus was the first to congratulate her, his respect evident as he praised her remarkable achievement. As Colonel Harrison presented Sara with the championship trophy, he spoke privately to her about her future in competitive shooting. "Miss Martina, what you have accomplished here represents natural talent developed through dedicated practice. This is just the beginning of what could be an extraordinary career in marksmanship." That evening, as Sara called her family to share the incredible news, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. The shy young woman who had arrived 3 days earlier had discovered not just shooting skills, but confidence, resilience, and the ability to perform under pressure that would serve her well beyond the shooting range. The championship had changed more than just Sara's status in the shooting community. It had revealed possibilities she had never imagined and opened doors to a future limited only by her willingness to pursue excellence. Her grandfather's patient teaching had planted seeds that had grown into something beautiful and powerful, proving that true skill combined with dedication could overcome any obstacle. Colonel Harrison's final words echoed in her mind as she prepared for the journey home. "Miss Martina, you have demonstrated that champions are not born from privilege or extensive resources, but from passion, practice, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. Today, you have inspired everyone present to reach higher and believe in the power of dedicated effort.